The email hit my phone while I was barefoot in the kitchen. A glass already slipping from my hand. Not dropped. Not shattered. Just forgotten. Because the words on the screen were louder than the crash that followed. I've moved your inheritance into my personal account. It's better this way. No greeting. No apology. No explanation. Just a photograph beneath it. A balcony. Warm light. 2 wine glasses. And my husband, shirt unbuttoned, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. Standing far too close to a woman who wasn't me. This was supposed to be his retreat. Silent mornings. Breathwork. Reflection. Finding alignment. Apparently, he'd found a lover instead. I bent down, picked up the unbroken glass, set it on the counter with steady hands. That surprised me. I'd always assumed betrayal would feel explosive. Screaming, shaking, collapsing against walls. Instead, I felt clear. Almost relieved. I reread the email once. Then again. Still no panic. No urge to call. No begging. No hesitating. No frantic passing. Just one thought, calm and precise. He thinks he won. I typed 6 words back. Thanks for letting me know. Then I locked my phone, turned off the kitchen light, and went upstairs to sleep alone in the bed he wouldn't be coming back to. And I slept better than I had in years. What my husband didn't know, what that smug little email accidentally confirmed, was that I had already seen this coming. Months ago. Long before the retreat. Before the lover. Before the theft he believed he'd pulled off so cleanly. The inheritance he thought he'd stolen? It had never been where he thought it was. And by sending that email, he hadn't trapped me. He'd handed me everything I needed. I met my husband long before betrayal had a face. Back when he still looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. We met at a professional conference. One of those polished, name badge, lukewarm coffee events where everyone pretends they're networking, but is really just trying to survive until the open bar. I was early in my career then, ambitious, exhausted, quietly proud of myself for getting there at all. He was charismatic in that effortless way that makes you lean in without realizing you're doing it. We talked for hours that first night. About work. About ambition. About how neither of us wanted a small life. We married a few years later. Built a home that looked impressive from the outside. Clean lines, curated furniture, dinner parties that photographed beautifully. No kids by choice. At least, that's what we told people. He said he wanted freedom. Focus. Space to grow. I believed him. For a long time things worked. We moved in parallel. Separate lanes, same direction. I built. He traveled. We smiled in pictures. We were admired. We were efficient. Then my aunt died. She was the woman who raised me after everything else fell apart. Practical. Quietly fierce. The kind of person who never wasted words or money. And somehow always had both when they mattered. When she left me her estate, it wasn't just money, it was history. Protection. A final instruction wrapped in trust paperwork, and one handwritten note I still keep folded in my wallet. Build something that lasts. My husband was supportive at first. Or at least he looked supportive. Then the questions started. Casual at first. Almost curious. Where exactly was the money held? Was it liquid? Could it be optimized? I told him I was still figuring things out. That I wanted to be careful. That my aunt had been very specific about structure and timing. He nodded. Smiled. Let it go. For a while. Then his retreats became more frequent. Weekends turned into long weeks. Phones turned face down. Passwords changed. Conversations shortened. I started noticing how often he laughed away from me. How his eyes were always elsewhere, even when his body was in the room. Once, I asked him directly if something was wrong. He kissed my forehead and told me I was overthinking. That should have been my answer. Instead, I waited. I listened. I watched. The first real warning came quietly, through a call I almost didn't take. My financial advisor's voice was careful, professional, edged with concern. Someone had tried to access information they shouldn't have. Nothing successful. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to trip alarms. I thanked him. Hung up. Sat still for a long time afterward. That night, my husband suggested we simplify our accounts. Fewer logins. Fewer barriers. Easier access for both of us. I agreed. Out loud. Inside, something clicked into place. Because simplicity is what people want when they're planning to take something that isn't theirs. The next morning, I drove out of town. I didn't accuse him. Didn't confront him. Didn't cry in anyone's office. I met with my aunt's attorney instead. The woman who'd helped design the inheritance structure in the first place. We talked facts. Paper trails. Safeguards. And when she explained just how protected everything already was, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Relief. Because my husband wasn't just drifting away. He was preparing. And so was I. By the time he kissed me goodbye for his so-called retreat, bags packed, smile already elsewhere, I had already begun doing the quiet work that would make his betrayal educational. He thought he was leaving me behind. In reality, he was walking straight into a trap I'd finished setting before he ever boarded that plane. The house exhaled the moment he left. That sounds dramatic, but I swear the air shifted. The doors closed. The engine faded. And suddenly, the silence felt honest for the first time in months. I didn't cry. I didn't stalk his location or scroll through his social media like a woman auditioning for her own breakdown. I made coffee, answered emails, folded laundry. Then I opened the shared cloud folder. The one we jokingly labeled future projects. A digital junk drawer of half ideas and optimistic plans. Renovations we'd discussed. Spaces we'd dreamed up and never built. He'd forgotten one thing. People who plan theft always assume the victim is emotional. They rarely plan for observant. Inside the folder, buried beneath inspiration photos and mislabeled PDFs, was a different kind of blueprint. Screenshots. My account summaries. Balance snapshots. Notes in his handwriting, careful, methodical, almost tender in their precision. There were diagrams, transfer steps, even a breakdown of what he'd keep and what he'd leave me. As if generosity could be calculated after betrayal. I scrolled slowly, my pulse steady. This hadn't started recently. This wasn't a moment of weakness or passion or finding himself. This was a strategy. And strategies leave trails. I closed the folder without forwarding anything, without printing, without reacting. That was important. Because the most dangerous thing you can do when someone thinks they're in control is let them keep believing it. The email came days later. Late evening. Different time zone. No quorums. Just a declaration and a photograph. Him. Her. A sunset designed to look accidental. He wanted me to see it. He wanted closure on his terms. What he didn't realize was that the email wasn't a power move. It was a confession. And confessions have consequences. I waited. Not out of fear. Out of strategy. I forwarded the message to exactly the right people. Documented everything. Let professionals do what professionals do when presented with evidence, timestamps, and audacity. When he finally called, his voice was smooth. Controlled. Almost kind. He thought calm meant I'd accepted defeat. He mistook silence for surrender. I asked him one question that night. Not about the money, not about the woman, not about the marriage. Where are you staying? The pause was microscopic. But it was there. That's when I knew he'd already moved on physically, not just emotionally. A second life. A second address. A second set of lies. By morning, I had confirmation. Hidden accounts. Regular transfers. A place he'd been funding quietly while I cooked dinners and asked about his day. The retreat wasn't about wellness. It was about exit timing. And he'd chosen poorly. That evening, a courier arrived at my door. Inside the envelope was the first sign that the tide had shifted. Formal, official, devastating in its simplicity. The first domino had fallen. My phone lit up moments later. His name. I didn't answer. Some people deserve to sit with the sound of their own confidence ringing unanswered. Because by then, the truth was unavoidable. He hadn't stolen my inheritance. He'd exposed himself. And the real consequences were just beginning. Confidence is loud right before it collapses. His call came early the next morning. Too early for someone who thought they were in control. His voice was clipped, polished, already rehearsed. He spoke the way people do when they believe paperwork will protect them from consequences. He told me we should keep this clean. He told me fighting would only waste money. He told me the transfer was already done. I let him talk. Then I asked him who his lawyer was. That question landed harder than I expected. I heard it in the way his breathing changed, how the rhythm slipped just enough to reveal the crack underneath the confidence. He gave me a name, proud of it like it was a shield. I thanked him. That really unsettled him. When the call ended, I didn't pace. I didn't scream into pillows. I didn't call a friend to replay every sentence. I made 2 phone calls, sent 3 emails, signed 1 document. By afternoon, the tone had changed everywhere except inside his head. His lawyer called me next. Careful, polite, measuring every word like the floor might give out beneath him. He asked questions my husband should have answered honestly weeks ago. About the inheritance structure. About access. About whether I had documentation. I answered calmly, precisely. Then I suggested gently that he verify what he'd been told before continuing. There was a long silence. People always think silence is weakness. In truth, it's usually calculation. By the time I drove to the bank, the story was already unraveling. Statements printed. Transfers highlighted. A slow, methodical bleed from our joint accounts into one I'd never seen before. Small amounts at first. Testing boundaries. Then bolder. Faster. This hadn't been impulsive. It had been practiced. The address tied to the account wasn't ours. It was his retreat. Or rather, his new life. When I left the bank, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't him. It was my attorney. His lawyer was withdrawing. No reputable professional likes discovering their client has been lying with enthusiasm and documentation. That evening, the house felt different. Not empty. Resolved. I poured myself a drink we'd been saving for an anniversary that would never happen. Sat at the kitchen counter and watched the light fade through windows we'd once chosen together. For the first time, I didn't feel like the abandoned one. I felt like the author. The messages started coming faster after that. Anger replaced charm. Accusations replaced reassurance. He told me I was overreacting. That I'd misunderstood. That the email was sent in anger. I replied once. That's not what the records show. There was a pause after that. A long one. Then a single question that told me everything. What records? I didn't answer. Instead, I asked one question of my own. Who is she? It took him a long time to respond. When he finally did, the name came wrapped in excuses. She was just a friend. Helping him through a difficult time. Someone who understood him. I didn't need the speech. I needed the confirmation. By morning I had it. A neighbor's casual observation. A familiar face in a photograph. A pattern of visits that matched my travel schedule a little too perfectly. He hadn't just left me. He'd replaced me. And somehow still believed he'd walk away with everything. That illusion didn't survive the afternoon. Because by then, the final package had been delivered. Every log. Every screenshot. Every transfer. Every lie. All placed neatly in the hands of someone whose job was to turn facts into consequences. By early evening, his new attorney was calling. Not to threaten, not to posture, but to negotiate. Fussed. Carefully. Urgently. I listened to the proposed settlement and said one word. No. Silence again. Then I told them what I wanted instead. Not revenge. Not blood. Closure. And the moment I said it out loud, I knew they'd accept. Because when someone realizes the ground beneath them is gone, they stop asking for mercy and start asking for exits. The morning everything ended, there was no courtroom drama. No raised voices. No judge. No audience. Just a conference room with glass walls, a stack of papers, and the quiet hum of air conditioning doing its job far better than my husband ever had. They arrived together, him and his lawyer, both trying very hard not to look at me. I noticed his hands first. They shook when he sat down. Not violently. Just enough to betray him. That was new. The agreement was already printed. Neat. Efficient. Final. He would return part of what he'd taken. He would make no claims against my inheritance. He would sign a non-disclosure agreement so tight it could suffocate gossip before it ever learned to speak. In exchange, I would not pursue the fraud angle. No criminal investigation. No public reckoning. No headlines he couldn't spin. I didn't smile when he signed. I didn't frown either. I just watched. When it was my turn, I signed once and slid a second envelope across the table. "What's this?" he asked, finally looking at me. "The passwords," I said. "To the cloud account. The alarm system. Anything you might need to retrieve whatever you left behind." His eyes searched my face, clearly hunting for triumph or bitterness. He found neither. That confused him more than anger ever could. "It was never about the money," I added quietly. "If it had been, this would have been easier." His lawyer touched his arm, signaling it was time to go. He stood, hesitated, then walked out without looking back. That was the last time I saw him. Life didn't snap back into place afterward. It unfolded. I sold the house. Too many echoes. Too many rooms that remembered a version of us that no longer existed. A new family moved in. Laughter, chaos. Twins racing along the path I'd once designed with someone who'd mistaken proximity for partnership. I downsized. Simplified. Learned how little I actually needed. With my aunt's inheritance. The real one, untouched and exactly where I'd always kept it. I did what she'd asked without ever knowing how perfectly she'd prepared me. I built something that lasted. A foundation. Scholarships. Opportunities for people who'd lost stability early and learned to build anyway. One afternoon, months later, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a check and a short note. The rest of what I owed. No signature. None needed. I deposited it without ceremony. Another scholarship funded. Another future redirected. That evening, I sat by the river watching the water move steadily forward, unbothered by what it left behind. My phone buzzed. An invitation to dinner. A new conversation. A small opening towards something unknown. I said yes. Not because I needed distraction, but because I was ready. Some people think the strongest response to betrayal is revenge. They're wrong. The strongest response is preparation. Because by the time he thought he was stealing from me, I'd already finished protecting myself. And he never even saw it coming. Please click the subscribe button, like, share and comment. This will encourage me to make more interesting stories. Also, let's know where you are watching from. Thank you and see you in the next story.